Karen marched into my yard, waving papers and screaming that my shed was unsafe. Within an hour the city inspector was here. But Karen had no idea. His verdict would humiliate her in front of everyone. The sun was barely up when I heard the sharp sound of knocking against my back fence. At first, I thought it was just the wind carrying branches, but then came the unmistakable voice of Karen Collins, our HOA president, and the self-appointed sheriff of our quiet cul-de-sac. Excuse me, sir. You need to come out here right now. I sighed, setting down my coffee. It was always something with her. If it wasn't the height of my grass, it was the way my trash cans were positioned. That morning it was the shed I'd built the weekend before. A modest, clean, sturdy little structure I'd put up to finally store my lawn tools and free up space in the garage. When I stepped into the backyard, Karen was standing there in her pressed khaki slacks and a floral blouse, clipboard tucked under her arm, tapping a pen like a judge ready to deliver a sentence. "That thing," she said, pointing dramatically toward my shed, "is an eyesore and a danger to this neighborhood." I blinked at her, caught off guard. "It's just a shed, Karen. I built it to code. It's safe." Her lips pursed. "Safe? Look at that roofline, it's slanted. The paint hasn't even dried. And don't get me started on the foundation. Do you realize children live on this street? What if it collapses on them?" Her voice carried across the yards, already drawing attention. Two neighbors, Tom from across the street and Mrs. Diaz from next door, peeked over their fences, curious about the commotion. "Karen, the shed isn't hurting anyone. I measured everything, used treated lumber, and it's anchored to the ground. It's safer than half the houses in this subdivision." She scoffed so loudly it echoed. "That's for the city to decide. And lucky for you, I've already reported it. The inspector is on his way." That made my stomach tighten. Dealing with Karen was one thing, but dragging the city into it meant paperwork, delays, maybe even fines, all because she didn't like the way my backyard looked. "You what?" I asked, voice sharper now. "I called first thing this morning," she replied smugly, as if she'd won some prize. "I told them there was an unsafe structure threatening property values. They're sending someone out today." Tom, still leaning on his fence, frowned. "Karen, isn't that a little extreme? The shed looks fine to me." Karen turned on him instantly. "Tom, you don't have children running around, do you? It only takes one splintered board, one rusted nail, and then what? A lawsuit for the HOA, that's what." Mrs. Diaz chimed in, her voice careful but firm. "Karen, maybe you should let the man enjoy his shed. He worked on it all weekend. It's not hurting anyone." Karen's cheeks flushed red. "This isn't about enjoyment. It's about safety and community standards. If he gets away with this, what's next? Tree houses? Chicken coops? Trailers and driveways? No. We have rules for a reason." I felt anger rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Karen, you've overstepped. You don't have authority to decide what's unsafe. That's the city's job, and I'm not worried about their inspection. Everything's up to code." "Oh, you should be worried," she snapped, wagging her pen at me. "Because when that inspector arrives and he sees what I see, you'll be tearing that thing down piece by piece." The tension thickened, neighbors gathering like an audience to a show they hadn't bought tickets for. A couple of kids on bikes stopped at the sidewalk, whispering and pointing at Karen, who now stood tall and righteous as if she were leading some moral crusade. I could feel the weight of every eye on me, and I knew Karen was counting on that, the public humiliation, the pressure to cave. But I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. "Fine," I said evenly. "Let the inspector come. Let him look at it. When he clears it, I expect you to apologize in front of everyone here." Karen's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Oh, you'll be the one apologizing. I guarantee it." She scribbled something down on her clipboard and marched off toward her own house, her shoulders stiff, her head held high like she'd just won the neighborhood war. I stood there in my yard, fists clenched at my sides, trying to hold back the frustration boiling in me. Building that shed had been my small victory, finally organizing years of clutter, finally creating a space of my own. And now, in less than a day, Karen had turned it into a neighborhood spectacle. The murmurs among the neighbors continued, everyone debating quietly, choosing sides without saying it aloud. Tom shook his head. "Man, she doesn't quit." Mrs. Diaz sighed. "Don't let her get to you. If your shed's safe, the inspector will see that. She can't control everything." I nodded, though the knot in my stomach didn't ease. Karen's words still rang in my ears. "He'll be tearing that thing down piece by piece." I tried to distract myself, going back inside, picking up my coffee again, but the calm of the morning was gone. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Because Karen wasn't just making noise. She'd brought the city into it. And I knew that when a city inspector showed up, things could get messy. Out the window, I caught sight of Karen pacing in her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. She wasn't done, not even close. And sure enough, less than an hour later, the unmistakable sound of tires crunching on gravel made me look up. A white truck with the city seal pulled into the cul-de-sac. The inspector had arrived. The inspector steps out, clipboard in hand, and Karen rushes toward him, already pointing at my shed like she's unveiling a crime scene. The inspector stepped out of the truck slowly, adjusting his cap against the morning sun. He looked to be in his mid-40s, lean and serious, the type of man who'd seen it all, from crooked decks to collapsing garages. His clipboard was tucked under one arm, a tape measure hanging from his belt, and the kind of expression that made you think he wasn't easily impressed. Karen rushed toward him like she had been waiting her whole life for this performance. Clipboard in her own hand, she pointed so aggressively at my shed that her arm shook. "Right there," she barked. "That's the unsafe structure I told you about. Endangering the whole neighborhood. You need to shut this down immediately before someone gets hurt." The inspector didn't even flinch. He simply nodded, scribbled something on his own clipboard, and then turned to me. "You the property owner?" I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, sir. Name's James Miller. Built the shed myself. All pressure-treated lumber, anchored posts, proper ventilation. You're welcome to take a look." Karen scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, please. You threw that thing together in a weekend. It's already leaning. Can't you see? Look at the roof, it's practically collapsing." The inspector raised an eyebrow, then walked right past her. He circled the shed slowly, running a hand along the siding, checking the corners, and crouching low to inspect the foundation. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Tom leaned casually on his fence, arms crossed, watching with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Mrs. Diaz stood with her arms folded, whispering to another neighbor who had wandered over. Even a couple of kids sat cross-legged on the sidewalk, eating popsicles and enjoying the spectacle. Karen, however, was in full theatrical mode. She followed the inspector step for step, pointing out imaginary flaws. "See that? The paint isn't even weather-sealed. And the slope of the roof is completely off. If it rains, that whole side will collapse into my yard. I'm telling you, this thing is a disaster waiting to happen." The inspector ignored her commentary, pulling out a small level and pressing it against the shed's frame. He tapped the bubble, nodded, and wrote something down. I could feel sweat forming at the back of my neck, not because I thought he'd find anything wrong, but because Karen's voice was drilling into my skull like nails on a chalkboard. Finally, the inspector straightened up, dusted off his hands, and gave me a neutral nod. "Construction looks solid. Roofline's fine. Anchoring's good. You poured gravel under the base?" "Yes, sir. 6 inches deep. Keeps the moisture out." He scribbled again. "Smart. That's better than a lot of homeowners do." Karen's face turned crimson. "Better than a lot of homeowners? Are you kidding me? Look at those screws. They're crooked. And the door doesn't even hang straight." The inspector opened the shed door, letting it swing slowly on its hinges. It glided smoothly, not a squeak, not a hitch. He swung it back and forth twice, then let it close with a soft click. "Door's fine," he said flatly. The crowd chuckled softly, a wave of suppressed laughter rolling across the yards. Karen whipped around, glaring at them as if daring anyone to speak out loud. I almost smiled, but I held it back. The last thing I wanted was to add fuel to her fire. "Anything else?" I asked carefully. The inspector glanced at his notes. "Not yet. I'll finish my walk around, check the roof from the ladder, then we'll talk." Karen was relentless. "No, you don't understand. You need to shut this down now. It's violating HOA aesthetics. It lowers property values." "My property values." The inspector stopped mid-step and gave her a long look. "Ma'am, I'm here to evaluate safety. Property values aren't my department." That shut her up, at least for 5 seconds. By now, Tom couldn't resist speaking up. "Looks like James knows what he's doing, Karen. That shed isn't going anywhere." Karen spun around, eyes flashing. "Of course you'd say that. You don't care about neighborhood standards. You let your leaves pile up every fall. It's disgusting." The crowd laughed again, louder this time. Tom just raised an eyebrow, smirking. The inspector unfolded his ladder, propped it against the shed, and climbed up with the easy confidence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. He ran his hand across the shingles, checked the nails, even tugged gently at the edge of the roofline. Everything held firm. From the top of the ladder, he called down, "Solid construction. No loose shingles. Slopes correct. Water runoff will drain fine. Karen's jaw dropped. What? No. That can't be right. You're not looking hard enough. Check again. The inspector climbed down, shaking his head. Ma'am, I've inspected sheds that were practically falling over. This one's better than average. The murmur of the crowd was growing, neighbors trading knowing glances, some even pulling out their phones to record the drama. Karen, flustered and desperate, turned to the inspector with a high-pitched voice. You're missing the point. He didn't get approval. He should have filed a request with the HOA first. The inspector raised his clipboard slowly. That's between him and the HOA. My job is city code. And city code doesn't require a permit for a shed this size. He's in the clear. For a moment there was silence. Complete silence. Then Karen exploded. This is outrageous. You're supposed to protect us, not enable unsafe behavior. Look at my yard, my children play right next door. How can you stand there and tell me that death trap is allowed? The inspector's eyes narrowed. He glanced over at her house, paint peeling on the trim, porch railing tilted slightly to one side, a loose gutter barely hanging on. His gaze lingered, thoughtful, as he made a note. Karen noticed, flustered. What are you looking at my house for? This isn't about me. This is about him. The inspector closed his notebook calmly. Ma'am, sometimes when I see certain issues nearby, I have to expand my inspection. It's standard procedure. Her mouth fell open. My house. There's nothing wrong with my house. But the inspector didn't answer. He was already walking toward her property, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning like a hawk. The inspector stops at Karen's front steps, crouches down, and presses his hand against the porch railing. It wobbles dangerously under the slightest pressure. He looks back at the crowd and raises his eyebrows. The inspector's hand pressed firmly against Karen's porch railing. It gave way under his weight with a groan, wobbling like it was barely attached. His brows knitted as he leaned down, tracing his fingers along the cracked paint and warped wood. The crowd fell silent. Even the kids on their bikes stopped chewing their popsicles. Everyone could hear the faint creak of the railing as it shifted. Karen rushed forward, flapping her hands. Don't touch that. That's private property. The inspector stood straight, brushing the dust off his palms. Ma'am, you called me here to investigate safety concerns. That extends to the immediate environment. And what I see here, well, it isn't good. Her mouth opened and closed, words tumbling over themselves. This is not about me, it's about him and his shed. She stabbed her finger toward my yard, as though sheer insistence might shift the spotlight back where she wanted it. But it didn't work. The inspector's eyes were locked on her porch. He crouched again, this time pulling a small flashlight from his belt and shining it along the base of the steps. The beam revealed splintered boards, a rusted nail jutting out at a dangerous angle, and a gaping hole where the wood had rotted completely through. He tapped the wood with the handle of his flashlight. It crumbled, sending a small cloud of dust into the air. Several neighbors gasped. Tom muttered from his fence, "Looks like the only thing unsafe around here isn't James's shed." A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the crowd. Karen's cheeks flushed deep crimson, her eyes darting from face to face as if daring someone to make a louder comment. "Inspector," she stammered, her voice pitching high, that's just cosmetic. The house is fine. Perfectly fine. You should be focusing on his violations." The inspector stood slowly, his presence calm but heavy, the kind of calm that carried authority. "Ma'am, cosmetic doesn't make railings sway like this. If a child leaned against this, it would give way. That's a hazard." Karen's composure cracked. "Hazard? Hazard? I've lived here 20 years without one accident. My house is perfectly safe." Mrs. Diaz raised her voice, steady but cutting. "I almost tripped on your steps last week, Karen. You've been ignoring that porch for years." Karen spun on her, eyes blazing. "Stay out of this." But the inspector wasn't done. He walked further along the porch, tracing the siding with his hand. The paint peeled away in long strips, exposing dark water damage underneath. He crouched again, this time pulling a small tool from his belt and pressing it into the wood. It sank in easily, the wood soft like sponge. He exhaled sharply. "Significant rot. This isn't cosmetic, it's structural." The murmurs around us grew louder, neighbors leaning in, phones lifted higher. It wasn't every day the queen of the HOA got her castle publicly inspected. Karen's voice rose to a near shriek. "This is harassment. You can't come here and pick apart my home. I didn't call you for this." The inspector turned toward her, his expression steady, almost stern. "Ma'am, you did call me. And once a complaint is filed, I'm obligated to investigate all potential hazards. That includes anything in plain view. And right now your house is showing multiple violations. The words hit like a hammer. Karen's shoulders slumped for just a moment before she straightened again, her voice trembling. This is outrageous. My house is worth more than his entire property. How dare you compare my home to a shed? Tom chuckled. Funny, his shed looks sturdier than your porch right now. The crowd laughed again, louder this time. Even the kids giggled, repeating the line under their breath. I stayed quiet, though inside, a wave of relief washed over me. For once, it wasn't me under Karen's microscope, it was her. The inspector jotted more notes. Loose railing. Severe wood rot. Exposed nails. This will need immediate attention. He glanced at Karen's sagging gutter above the porch, where rainwater had left a dark streak down the siding. And that drainage issue isn't helping your foundation either. Karen's voice cracked. You can't put this on record. Do you hear me? This is private. The inspector gave her a long, level look. Ma'am, when you file a complaint, you invite the city onto your property. And when safety hazards are identified, they go into the record. That's the law. The crowd buzzed louder, whispers turning into open commentary. About time someone checked her place. She's always nitpicking everyone else. Can't believe she had the nerve to call his shed unsafe. Karen's hands shook. She waved her clipboard like a weapon, but her voice faltered. This is a setup. He put you up to this, didn't he? She turned to me, eyes burning. You think you're so clever? Well, this isn't over. The inspector ignored her accusation. He pulled out his phone, snapping a few photos of the railing, the rot, the gutter. Each click of the camera felt like another nail in Karen's coffin. Finally, he closed his clipboard. I'll need to file a preliminary report. There are issues here that can't be ignored. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen stood frozen, her face drained of color. And then, in a desperate attempt to regain control, she shouted, "This is a waste of taxpayer money. You're focusing on the wrong property. His shed is illegal. You need to condemn it now." The inspector looked her dead in the eye. "Ma'am, your neighbor's shed is safer than your house." The words rang out like a verdict. The crowd erupted, gasps, laughter, whispers all at once. Some people clapped. A couple of teenagers even cheered. Karen's jaw dropped, her entire body trembling. Safer? Than my house. That's slander. But before she could spiral further, the inspector lifted his radio. I'll need to get building and safety out here to confirm. Karen's face twisted in horror. What do you mean, building and safety? The inspector didn't answer her. He stepped aside, already dialing the number on his phone. The inspector speaks quietly into his phone, but loud enough for the crowd to hear one chilling line. Yes, we'll need a secondary inspection team here, possible code violations on the main residence. Karen staggers back, eyes wide, realizing the city might be about to come down on her. Karen's face drained of color as the inspector ended his call, snapping his phone shut with a firm click. The neighbors stirred like bees around a hive, murmurs thickening into open chatter. Phones were still out, recording every second of what felt less like a routine inspection and more like a public trial. Karen clutched her clipboard so tightly her knuckles whitened. She hissed, "You can't just bring in more inspectors. That's harassment. That's illegal." The inspector adjusted his cap, calm as stone. "Ma'am, what's illegal is leaving hazards like this unattended. The city has a responsibility to act when violations are in plain view. That porch is a liability." Her voice cracked. "It's fine. It's been like that for years, no one's ever been hurt." Tom from across the street piped up with a dry laugh. "Yeah, only because no one's dared to step foot on it." The crowd chuckled again, louder this time, and Karen whipped her head around, glaring at everyone like a cornered animal. "Shut up. All of you shut up." But the inspector wasn't finished. He stepped down from the porch and began circling Karen's house the way he had with my shed earlier. His pen scratched against the clipboard as he made notes, his eyes scanning every detail. Warped siding, peeling paint, gutters hanging by a single nail. Karen darted in front of him, arms outstretched like she could physically block his line of sight. "No. You can't just walk around my property. This isn't allowed." The inspector raised a brow. "Ma'am, you filed the complaint. You opened this inspection. That gives me authority to examine safety conditions in immediate view. If you didn't want this, you shouldn't have called the city." The truth hit her like a slap. She staggered back but still kept her chin lifted in stubborn defiance. "This is ridiculous. He's the one violating codes, not me. Look at that shack he calls a shed." I stayed silent, but inside I was boiling with satisfaction. For once, Karen's crusade had backfired, and everyone was seeing it in real time. Mrs. Diaz crossed her arms. Karen, you should stop before you make this worse for yourself. Worse? Karen shrieked. Do you have any idea what this will do to my reputation? To my property value? If the HOA finds out, She stopped herself abruptly, realizing too late that the HOA board already had front row seats. Because standing at the edge of the crowd, phone in hand, was Alan Brooks, the HOA treasurer. His expression was grim, his thumb tapping the record button with deliberate slowness. Karen froze, her eyes widening. Alan. Alan, turn that off. He shook his head. No, Karen. For years, you've reported everyone else for the smallest things. This is finally on you. The inspector bent to look at the base of her garage door, where the wood frame was warped and splintered. He pressed his tool into it. Another crumble of rot flaked to the ground. He made another note. Karen's voice grew shrill. That's just wear and tear. Every house has it. The inspector looked up, calm but firm. Not at this level. This is a safety hazard. And with those gutters clogged, water is seeping into the siding. If this continues, you'll have structural damage. The neighbors murmured louder. Someone whispered, didn't she fine me for leaving a trash can out overnight? Another voice chimed in, she wrote me up for having Christmas lights past January. And look at her house, falling apart. Karen's breathing grew ragged, her clipboard shaking in her grip. She tried to hold her head high, but her eyes darted nervously as if looking for an escape. The inspector capped his pen. Ma'am, I'll be honest with you. If I write this up, you'll be looking at citations. Multiple. You'll have 30 days to start repairs or it escalates. The words echoed through the cul-de-sac like a verdict. Karen's jaw dropped. Citations? On my house. That's impossible. I'm the HOA president. The inspector's lips twitched in something close to amusement. City code doesn't care about HOA titles, ma'am. The law applies to everyone. The crowd hummed with agreement. Some people clapped. Tom leaned forward, smirking. Guess rules aren't so fun when they apply to you, huh, Karen? Karen spun toward him, eyes blazing. This is a setup. You're all conspiring against me. You think this makes you better than me? You'll regret this, all of you. The inspector ignored her outburst. He turned toward me. Mr. Miller, I'll need to finish documenting your shed for completeness, but so far everything checks out. You did a solid job. The relief that surged through me was almost overwhelming. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, though every muscle in my body wanted to smile. Thank you, sir. Karen stomped her foot like a child. You can't just say his shed is fine. It's not fine. Look at it, it's ugly, it's cheap, it's... The inspector cut her off. Ma'am, it meets city standards. That's all that matters. Aesthetics are your HOA's problem, not mine. Alan, the treasurer, raised his phone higher. Oh, trust me, the HOA will be discussing this. Your house failing inspection while you've been handing out fines? That's not going to sit well. Karen's entire body stiffened, her knuckles white around her clipboard. Alan, if you dare bring this up, I'll... Before she could finish, the inspector's radio crackled. A calm voice came through. Unit 6, Secondary Inspection Team en route. ETA 15 minutes. Karen's eyes went wide with horror. Secondary inspection? No, you don't understand. I can't have this on record. It'll ruin me. The inspector met her gaze evenly. Ma'am, the record already exists. It's my job to protect public safety, not reputations. The neighbors erupted in whispers again, excitement sparking like wildfire. Phones were held higher, faces grinning. For once, Karen was on the receiving end of the rules she had wielded like a sword for years. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time she looked small, cornered, powerless, exposed. But then, as quickly as the weakness showed, her face hardened again. This isn't over, she said, her voice shaking with fury. I'll fight this. You'll all see. I'll take this to the board. I'll take it to the mayor if I have to. The inspector made another note, unfazed. You can take it wherever you like. But the violations stand. And then, the sound of another engine hummed down the street. A second white truck, this one larger, pulled into the cul-de-sac. The secondary inspection team had arrived. The crowd turned as the new inspector stepped out, carrying heavier equipment. One of them pointed directly at Karen's roofline. We'll start up there. Karen's face went pale as chalk. The rumble of the second city truck was like thunder rolling through the cul-de-sac. Everyone turned to watch as it eased into a parking spot by Karen's driveway. The words Building and Safety Department gleamed on the side in bold letters. Two new inspectors stepped out, heavier toolkits slung over their shoulders, clipboards in hand. They looked serious, methodical, men used to finding problems where others saw none. Karen staggered back a step, clutching her clipboard to her chest like it was a shield. Her voice trembled. "This isn't necessary. I didn't call for this. I don't consent." The first inspector, still calm, replied evenly. "Ma'am, the moment safety hazards are identified, a secondary inspection becomes protocol. Consent isn't optional when public safety is at risk." The words dropped like stones in the silence. The neighbors leaned closer, whispering like spectators at a prize fight. Some had pulled out lawn chairs now, settling in as though this was better than television. Kids sat cross-legged on the sidewalk, wide-eyed at the drama unfolding. One of the new inspectors pointed at the roofline of Karen's house. The shingles curled upward like dried leaves, patches of dark mold creeping down from the ridge. "We'll start there," he said flatly. Karen's head whipped up. "The roof? That's just cosmetic wear. Everyone's roof ages. You can't possibly say that's unsafe." But the inspector was already climbing the ladder, his flashlight strapped to his head. From the crowd below, we watched him run his hand across the shingles. A clump of them came loose under the slightest pressure, tumbling down to the driveway in a small pile. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The inspector's voice carried clearly from above. "Shingles compromised. Water damage present. This roof is failing." Karen's face went ashen. "No. That's not. Those shingles just need resealing, that's all." The inspector climbed down, shaking his head. He scribbled into his clipboard. "Ma'am, this isn't a ceiling issue. This is structural neglect. Water's been leaking under here for years." Karen spun to the crowd, desperate now. "He's exaggerating. All of them are exaggerating. My house is fine. Look at his shed." But every eye in the cul-de-sac was on her roof, not my shed. The contrast was painfully obvious. My new shed standing straight and clean, while Karen's home was visibly falling apart under closer scrutiny. The second inspector crouched by the base of her house, pulling away a loose panel of siding with gloved hands. It snapped off easily, revealing black rot spreading underneath. The smell of damp wood drifted into the air. He glanced at his partner. "This isn't new. Been festering a long time." Karen's voice cracked into a high-pitched screech. "That's a lie. That's vandalism. You can't just rip things off my house like that." But the inspector stood, siding piece in hand, and turned to show the crowd the rot. The blackened, spongy wood told its own story. The neighbors groaned. Tom muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Safer than her house." Guess he wasn't kidding. The laughter that followed wasn't hidden this time. Even Alan, the HOA treasurer, smirked as he kept recording. Karen's fury boiled over. "This is all his fault," she screamed, pointing at me. "James set this up. He bribed them, I know it." I raised my hands slowly. "Karen, I didn't bribe anyone. You called them here. You started this." The inspector backed me up immediately. "Ma'am, the city operates independently. Accusing us of bribery won't erase the violations." Her jaw trembled, but she had no answer. Meanwhile, the inspectors kept working, moving methodically. One of them tested the porch steps. The second board collapsed under his weight, snapping with a loud crack that echoed across the street. The crowd gasped again, followed by a low whistle from Tom. "Yikes. That's one lawsuit waiting to happen." Karen clutched her clipboard tighter, as if she could hold her world together through sheer force of will. That only broke because you stomped on it." "It's fine." But the inspector shook his head, holding up the broken board like evidence in a trial. "This wood's been rotten for years. A child could have broken through it." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, angrier even. Neighbors who had been fined or harassed by Karen for minor infractions were now watching her house fall apart piece by piece. Mrs. Diaz finally spoke up, her voice steady and sharp. "Karen, you fined me $50 last year for leaving a recycling bin visible. And look at this, your whole porch is a hazard. You should have fixed your own house before judging anyone else's." Others chimed in. "She fined me for a garden hose on my lawn. She wrote me up for Christmas lights in February. She reported my car for being in the street one night." Each complaint was like another nail in her coffin. Karen's composure cracked with every word. She shrank visibly but still tried to bark back. "I was protecting the community. That's what presidents do." The inspector turned to the neighbors. "Protecting the community starts with making sure your own property isn't a danger. This porch, this siding, this roof, they all fail basic safety standards." Then he looked straight at Karen. Ma'am, at this point your house has more violations than any I've seen in months. If this continues it could be condemned. The words hung heavy in the air. Condemned. The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers. Some people actually clapped. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Karen's legs wobbled. She clung to her clipboard like it was a life raft, her eyes wide with panic. Condemned? You can't say that. This is my home. My perfect home. Everyone admires my house. But no one admired it now. Not with the inspectors circling like hawks, not with the siding crumbling in their hands and the porch collapsing under their boots. Alan, the treasurer, lowered his phone just long enough to mutter, "Karen, the board's going to have a field day with this." Karen spun on him, face red, voice shrill. "You traitor. You think you can take my position? Over my dead body." But before she could say more, one of the inspectors snapped a series of photos and handed her a yellow slip of paper. "This is your citation notice," he said calmly. 30 days to address immediate safety hazards. Failure to comply will escalate to further enforcement." Karen stared at the paper as though it were poison. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped it. The neighbors whispered, laughed, pointed. For once it wasn't me or anyone else under fire. It was her, the queen of fines, the enforcer of trivial rules, being fined herself. But Karen wasn't done. Not yet. Her eyes lifted, burning with something darker than embarrassment. "This isn't over. I'll sue. I'll fight every single one of you. You'll regret humiliating me." And with that, she stormed back up her porch steps, only for the weakened railing to snap under her grip. She stumbled, barely catching herself before tumbling to the ground. The crowd gasped. The inspector shook his head. "Ma'am, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You need repairs immediately." Karen froze on her porch, humiliated, holding the broken railing in her hand as the neighbors stared. The inspector raised his pen again and said, "That's another violation to add to the list." The inspector's words hit like a hammer. "That's another violation to add to the list." Karen stood frozen on her porch, one hand gripping the broken railing, her face pale beneath layers of foundation. For years she had been the one pointing fingers, writing citations, humiliating neighbors at HOA meetings. Now she was the one exposed, caught in front of the very people she once lorded over. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, broken only by the faint scratching of the inspector's pen as he wrote another line on his clipboard. Tom finally broke the tension with a low whistle. "Guess we all know whose house is the real hazard." The crowd laughed. Not the polite chuckles of earlier, but full-on belly laughter. People clapped. A teenager shouted, "Burn!" and his friends roared with amusement. Karen's lips trembled, but she tried to rally. She lifted her clipboard like it was still a badge of authority. "This isn't fair. You're humiliating me in front of everyone. My house is perfectly safe compared to that monstrosity." She pointed wildly at my shed, as if the mere gesture could redirect the storm gathering over her. The inspector didn't even look at the shed. He turned slowly to face her, his expression carved in stone. "Ma'am, I've inspected your neighbor's shed. It's anchored, sealed, and built to code. I've inspected your home. It has multiple safety violations: rot, structural instability, failing roof, dangerous porch. Let me put this plainly." He paused, letting the silence build, every pair of eyes locked on him. "Your neighbor's shed," he said finally, voice clear and cutting, "is safer than your house." The crowd erupted. Gasps, laughter, even applause. Some neighbors shouted, "Oh," like kids in a schoolyard fight. Phones captured every angle of Karen's face as the blood drained from it. She staggered back, clutching the railing for support, forgetting it was broken. It snapped again and she nearly fell, saved only by grabbing the porch post. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Alan, the HOA treasurer, shook his head in disbelief. "Karen, do you realize what this means? You fined half the neighborhood over grass length, mailbox paint, even trash can lids. And now you're the one with a condemned railing and a failing roof." Karen's voice cracked into a shriek. "Stop recording me. This isn't legal. None of you have the right." But no one stopped. In fact, more phones came out. A neighbor from 3 houses down whispered, "This is going viral," as she tilted her phone for a better shot. Karen turned on me, eyes blazing. You did this. You set me up. You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone." I raised my hands calmly. "Karen, you called the inspector. You insisted on this inspection. I didn't do anything." The inspector backed me up, his voice sharp. "Ma'am, this is the result of your own complaint. If you hadn't reported your neighbor, none of this would be happening. The responsibility is yours." The truth hung in the air like a weight Karen couldn't lift. For the first time she had no comeback, no clever retort, no rulebook to hide behind. Just the reality of her crumbling house and the city's authority staring her down. The second inspector held up the rotten siding he'd pulled earlier. This is years of neglect. If you'd spent as much time repairing your home as you did policing your neighbors, we wouldn't be here. The crowd cheered. Laughter and clapping echoed down the cul-de-sac. It was the kind of justice the neighborhood had been waiting for, a public reckoning. Karen's voice broke into a desperate plea. Please. Please don't put this on record. I'll fix it. I swear I'll fix it. Just don't file the report. But the inspector shook his head. It's already filed. Photos, notes, citations, it's all official. You'll receive follow-up instructions by mail within the week. Her knees buckled, and for a moment I thought she might collapse on the spot. She clutched her clipboard tighter, as if holding on to the last shred of control she had left. And then in one final burst of rage she screamed, "This isn't over. You'll regret this. All of you will regret this." Her voice echoed off the houses, but it no longer carried authority. It sounded small, desperate, hollow. Tom crossed his arms, smirking. Funny, that's what you said when you fined me for having my grill out. Guess karma works fast. The crowd laughed again, and this time it was louder, freer. People weren't afraid of Karen anymore. The inspector closed his clipboard with a snap. This concludes today's inspection. Mr. Miller, he nodded to me, your shed passes with no issues. Mrs. Collins, he turned to Karen, you have 30 days to address these violations. Failure to comply will result in further penalties. Karen's face crumpled. 30 days. 30 days to repair what years of neglect had caused. 30 days before her entire reign as HOA president collapsed under the weight of her own hypocrisy. The crowd began to disperse, neighbors muttering to each other, laughing, shaking their heads. For once, it wasn't fear or frustration in their voices, it was relief. I stood quietly, the knot in my chest finally loosening. 4 years, Karen had made my life and everyone else's a nightmare with her nitpicking and power trips. Now the tables had turned, not by anything I'd done, but by her own hand. As the inspectors loaded their equipment back into their trucks, Karen remained on her porch, staring at the yellow citation slip as though it were a death sentence. Her clipboard hung useless at her side. Alan, the treasurer, spoke quietly but firmly. Karen, I'll be calling an emergency board meeting. The HOA needs to review your position after this. Karen's head snapped up, eyes wild. No. You can't. I'm the president. You can't take that from me. Alan's expression was grim. We'll see what the bylaws say. Her shoulders sagged, her defiance flickering like a candle about to go out. But even in that moment you could see it, she wasn't done. Karen Collins never admitted defeat, not fully. She'd find a way to claw back no matter how desperate. And sure enough, as the inspectors drove away, she lifted her chin, eyes narrowing. This isn't the end, she whispered. Karen disappeared into her house, slamming the door so hard the loose gutter rattled. But before it shut completely, her voice drifted out through the crack. If they think they can laugh at me, they have no idea what's coming next. The slam of Karen's door rattled through the cul-de-sac, but the silence didn't last long. Neighbors lingered in small clusters, buzzing with excitement, replaying the inspector's verdict like it was the highlight of a football game. Did you hear him? One man laughed. Safer than her house. Best thing I've ever heard in this neighborhood, another said, still chuckling as she folded up her lawn chair. I stayed by my shed, sipping what was left of my lukewarm coffee, trying not to let my satisfaction show too much. It wasn't in my nature to gloat. But inside, I felt 10 years' worth of weight finally sliding off my shoulders. That relief lasted about 5 minutes. Because suddenly Karen's door flew open again. She stormed out onto her porch, face flushed, hair disheveled, clipboard gone. She wasn't the HOA president anymore. She looked like a woman unraveling. You think this is funny? She shrieked, her voice splitting the air. You're all standing there laughing at me like I'm some kind of joke? You're the joke. This neighborhood would be in ruins without me. The laughter died down, replaced by murmurs of unease. Her eyes darted wildly, settling on me like a hawk spotting prey. And you, she spat. You think you've won? You think that shed makes you better than me? You humiliated me, James. You'll pay for this. Before I could answer, Alan, the HOA treasurer, stepped forward, phone still in hand. Karen, stop. You've done enough. Everyone saw the inspector's reports. You brought this on yourself. Karen let out a harsh, bitter laugh. On myself? No. This is a conspiracy. The city, the inspectors, you, James, all of you. You've been plotting against me for years. But I won't let you take me down. Her voice rose higher, cracking under the strain. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. A couple of kids were hurried inside by their parents. Then Karen marched down her porch steps, clipboard forgotten, her fists clenched tight. She cut across her yard and into the street, heading straight toward me. I took a cautious step back, my pulse quickening. Karen, I said carefully, this isn't the way to handle it. Just fix your house. Move on. Move on, she snapped. You think I'll just roll over and let you all destroy me? No. I'm in charge here. I always have been. I make the rules. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes burned with something almost feral. Tom called out from across the street. Karen, you need to calm down. She spun on him, jabbing her finger. Don't you dare tell me what to do. You're all freeloaders, leeches, dragging this neighborhood down while I kept it together. And now you're laughing at me? The tension was sharp, electric. For the first time, I wasn't just annoyed by Karen. I was worried. Worried she might actually do something reckless. And apparently, I wasn't the only one. Because just then, the distant wail of a siren drifted closer. Every head turned. A moment later, a police car rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing but siren silenced. Karen froze mid-rant, her chest heaving. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. The cruiser parked by the curb. Two officers stepped out, calm, steady, professional. One of them, a tall woman with dark hair tucked neatly under her cap, raised her hand. Afternoon, folks. We got a call about a disturbance. What's going on here? All eyes shifted to Karen. She was the first to speak, voice cracking under the strain. Officers, thank God you're here. These people, they're harassing me. Ganging up on me. My neighbor built an unsafe shed, and when I tried to protect the community, they turned against me. The officers exchanged a quick glance. The taller one flipped open a small notebook. All right, ma'am. We'll hear everyone out. Sir, she turned to me, you the homeowner with the shed? Yes, ma'am, I said evenly. Inspector already came out. City approved it. Shed's up to code. Karen lunged forward, nearly spitting with rage. He's lying. That inspector was biased. They're all biased. Look at my house. They're fabricating violations just to humiliate me. The other officer, a stocky man with calm eyes, frowned. Ma'am, we saw the inspectors leaving when we pulled in. They don't fabricate reports. That's not how this works. Karen's voice climbed higher. You don't understand. They're all against me. Everyone's against me. The taller officer held up a hand. Ma'am, you need to lower your voice. But Karen couldn't stop. Her words tumbled out faster, more frantic. This is my neighborhood. What? Without me it all falls apart. And now you're all laughing at me, treating me like I'm trash. Her tirade was cut off by Tom, who muttered loudly, You said it, not us. The crowd burst into laughter again. Even a few snickers came from people who had been silent until now. Phones lifted higher, capturing every moment. Karen spun in a full circle, her face crimson, her eyes wild. Stop laughing. Stop filming me. I'm not the villain here, I'm the only one who ever cared. The taller officer stepped forward, voice steady but firm. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to calm down. Right now you're disturbing the peace. Do you want to be cited for that too? The words hit her like a slap. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time she faltered. But then her eyes locked on me again and her rage flared back. She pointed, hand shaking. This is your fault. You'll regret this. I swear you will. The officer shifted her stance, body language tense. Ma'am, I'm warning you. But Karen ignored her, taking a step toward me, fists clenched, eyes blazing. The crowd gasped. Phones zoomed in. The stocky officer moved quickly, stepping between us, his hand resting on his belt. That's enough, ma'am. Step back. Now. For a tense moment, it looked like Karen might push it further, might actually snap completely. Her breathing was ragged, her body trembling with fury. And then, with a strangled cry, she spun around and stormed back toward her porch. She stomped up the broken steps, the loose railing wobbling dangerously again. At the top, she turned and shouted one final line at the entire crowd. You'll all regret this day. Then she disappeared inside, slamming the door so hard one of the gutter nails popped loose and clattered to the ground. The officers exchanged a look, then turned to me. Sir, you good here? I nodded, though my pulse was still racing. I'm fine. Thanks for coming. The taller officer sighed. We'll file a disturbance report. If she comes after you again, call us. But, Looks like she's done enough damage to herself already. The neighbors chuckled again, nodding in agreement. The police climbed back into their cruiser, lights still flashing as they rolled slowly out of the cul-de-sac. The crowd dispersed gradually, but the energy hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to let go, not after a humiliation this public. As the police car turned the corner, I looked back at Karen's darkened windows. A shadow flickered inside. She was still there watching. Waiting. And I had no doubt she was planning her next move. The flashing red and blue lights had barely faded from the cul-de-sac before the neighbors began gathering again. Some lingered by their fences, others stood in clusters at the end of the driveways, their voices low but buzzing with excitement. Karen's meltdown had turned the quiet Saturday morning into the most dramatic spectacle this neighborhood had ever seen. And though the police had left, the aftershocks were still rumbling. I stood near my shed, hands in my pockets, eyes scanning Karen's house. Her curtains twitched once, just enough to remind everyone she was still inside, still watching. Alan, the HOA treasurer, approached me with his phone still recording. "James, don't think for a second this video won't be played at the board meeting. After tonight, Karen's reign as president is over." I nodded slowly. "I didn't want it to come to this, Alan. I just built a shed." Alan gave a grim smile. "And she built her own downfall." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, but it was short-lived. Because just then another city truck rolled into the cul-de-sac, this one marked code enforcement unit. The murmurs hushed. Heads turned. Phones lifted again. Karen's front door creaked open, and she appeared on her porch, pale and shaking but trying to pull herself together. She clutched her robe tightly around her shoulders, eyes darting nervously. One of the officers from the new truck, clipboard in hand, walked directly toward her. His tone was professional but stern. "Mrs. Collins? We received confirmation from Building and Safety of multiple violations. We're here to finalize the report." Karen's voice cracked. "Finalize? No. You don't understand, this was all a mistake. My porch railing just snapped. It's never done that before. You don't need to file anything. I'll take care of it quietly." The officer shook his head. "Ma'am, once violations are documented, they can't be erased. They're part of the official record. Ignoring them will only make things worse." Karen's face crumpled. "Please. I've been the HOA president here for 15 years. Everyone looks up to me. If you put this in writing, I'll lose everything." From the back of the crowd, Tom called out, "You already lost everything, Karen." The laughter that followed was sharp, unrestrained. Karen flinched like she'd been slapped. The officer didn't smile. He just continued. "Mrs. Collins, you'll receive a formal notice in the mail, but I'm giving you verbal confirmation now. You are required to repair your roof, porch, siding, and gutters within 30 days. A follow-up inspection will verify compliance. Failure to comply can lead to fines, liens, or in extreme cases, condemnation." The word condemnation rippled through the crowd like electricity. Karen let out a strangled sound, half sob, half scream. "You can't condemn my house. It's the nicest property here." But all anyone had to do was glance at her leaning porch and blackened siding to see the truth. The officer turned his attention to me. "Mr. Miller?" "Yes, sir?" "Your shed passed inspection. No violations. It's structurally sound. You did a fine job." The crowd erupted in cheers and clapping. For once, the applause wasn't for an HOA decree, it was for a homeowner standing tall against the so-called queen of the cul-de-sac. Karen's knees buckled and she sank onto her porch steps, head in her hands. 4 years she had thrived on humiliation, writing fines, calling out small infractions, lording over neighbors. Now she was the one reduced, her empire of authority collapsing in front of everyone. Alan spoke up again, his voice clear and deliberate. "Karen, as treasurer, I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting for tomorrow. We'll be discussing your removal as president." Karen's head snapped up, eyes blazing through her tears. "You can't remove me. I built this HOA. Without me, this neighborhood would be chaos." Mrs. Diaz stepped forward. "It already was chaos, Karen. Because of you." The crowd murmured in agreement. Karen pointed wildly at me again. "You don't understand. He's dangerous. That shed." The officer cut her off, his voice sharp. "Mrs. Collins. Enough. The shed is safe. Your house isn't. That's the end of it." Her mouth opened, but no words came. For once, Karen Collins was silenced. The officer finished his notes, then handed her a copy of the violation list. She took it with trembling fingers, staring at the yellow paper like it was a death sentence. The neighbors watched, some shaking their heads, some filming, some whispering. The power dynamics of the entire neighborhood had shifted in one morning. As the officer returned to his truck, the crowd began to disperse, satisfied that justice had finally been served. But even as people left, they glanced back at Karen's porch, where she sat slumped, her empire crumbling around her. Tom muttered to me as he passed, "Bet she won't be writing any more citations for trash cans." I gave a tired smile. Let's hope. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't finished. Not really. Her pride wouldn't let her accept defeat even now. And sure enough, as I turned to head back inside, I caught a glimpse of her through the porch railing. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears, but her expression was hard as stone. She mouthed something, words only I could see. "This isn't over." A chill slid down my spine. Because I knew she meant it. As the code enforcement truck drove away, Karen stood shakily, staring straight at me across the yard. Her lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. And in that smile, I saw not surrender, but a promise of retaliation. The sun was starting to sink lower, throwing long shadows across the cul-de-sac. The laughter had faded, the code enforcement truck was gone, but the tension lingered like smoke after a fire. Everyone had seen the verdict. Karen's fortress was crumbling, and there was no hiding it now. I thought maybe she'd retreat inside and stay quiet, lick her wounds until the storm passed. But Karen Collins was never one to retreat. The screen door creaked open again and out she came, this time with her phone in hand live-streaming herself. Her voice shook, but she forced it into that same commanding tone she always used at HOA meetings. "Attention neighbors. You are all witnesses to the corruption happening here today. This is harassment, plain and simple. These so-called inspectors are biased. They've been bribed to make me look bad while ignoring real violations." The hypocrisy was almost comical, but Karen didn't see it. She held her phone high, panning across the cul-de-sac like she was documenting evidence for a court case. Alan, still standing at the curb, crossed his arms. "Karen, half the neighborhood recorded the inspections. Everyone saw what happened. You can't twist this." Karen jabbed her finger at him. "You shut your mouth, Alan. You've been gunning for my position for years. This is your chance, isn't it? To stab me in the back and steal the presidency." Alan shook his head slowly, almost pitying her. "No one's stealing anything, Karen. You lost the neighborhood all on your own." The neighbors murmured their agreement. Mrs. Diaz stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Karen, you fined me for having my recycling bin out for 2 hours after pickup. 2 hours. And now you're begging us to ignore rotten wood and collapsing railings." Another neighbor added, "She fined me for a cracked driveway. A hairline crack. And look at hers, splitting all the way down the middle." Karen spun in circles, pointing at each speaker. "Lies. All lies. I've only ever done what's best for this community." The crowd erupted, voices overlapping, everyone with their own story. "She fined my husband for leaving the grill out overnight. She wrote me up for a garden hose stretched across the lawn. She threatened me over wind chimes, for God's sake." Each accusation was another stone thrown at her crumbling castle. And Karen, once untouchable, looked smaller with every word. Her voice rose into a shriek. "You're all ungrateful. Without me this neighborhood would fall apart. I kept the property values high. I made this place desirable." Tom, leaning lazily on his fence, shot back. "Yeah? Then how come your house is falling apart while James's shed passed with flying colors?" Laughter rolled through the crowd again. Karen's face turned scarlet. She tried to regain control, lifting her phone higher. "This is defamation. You're ganging up on me. The law will be on my side." But just then the first inspector reappeared, returning with a folder under his arm. The murmurs quieted as he approached. He stopped at Karen's porch, flipping open the folder. "Mrs. Collins, here is the preliminary report. Photos, notes and citations are all included. You'll receive an official copy by mail, but this is your notice. 30 days to correct the violations." Karen's hand shook as she reached for the folder. She stared at it as though it were burning her fingers. The inspector's voice carried across the crowd. "To be clear, if these repairs aren't completed in time, further action will be taken. That includes possible fines, legal proceedings, or in extreme cases, condemnation." The word echoed again, heavier this time. The neighbors gasped, whispering fiercely. Karen's mouth dropped open. "Condemnation? Of my house? Do you know who I am?" The inspector closed the folder calmly. "Yes, ma'am. You're a homeowner under city code just like everyone else. Titles don't exempt you from safety standards." That line landed harder than anything else. 4 years, Karen had acted like her HOA presidency put her above the rest of us, untouchable. And now the truth was spelled out plainly, she was no different. Alan spoke again, his voice carrying authority. Karen, tomorrow we'll vote on your removal as president. You've embarrassed this board and this neighborhood long enough. Karen whipped her head toward him, her eyes wild. You can't. I'll bring lawyers. I'll drag this whole community through court. Mrs. Diaz stepped forward, her voice cold. Do it. We'll testify. Every single one of us. The neighbors nodded, one by one. The power Karen had wielded for years was gone, shifted to the very people she'd ruled over. Karen's phone slipped from her grip, clattering onto the porch. For a moment she just stood there, trembling, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her downfall. Then she whispered, barely audible but caught by the quiet of the cul-de-sac, "You'll regret this. All of you." The inspector turned on his heel and walked back toward his truck. Alan followed, speaking quietly with him. The neighbors slowly began to disperse, satisfied that justice had finally come. But I stayed behind, watching Karen. She sat heavily on her porch step, the yellow citation slip fluttering in her lap. Her eyes burned holes into me, unblinking, full of something darker than anger, hatred mixed with humiliation. For the first time I wondered if I should be worried. Because Karen Collins wasn't just defeated. She was cornered. And cornered people are dangerous. As the last of the neighbors went inside, Karen stood on her porch, gripping the railing stump like a weapon. She locked eyes with me across the yard and hissed one chilling line, "This isn't the end, James. This is just the beginning." The night after Karen's meltdown, the cul-de-sac was quieter than it had been in years. No more shouting, no more clipboards being waved around, no more frantic notes stuck to garage doors. Just the hum of crickets and the faint glow of porch lights. But everyone knew tomorrow would bring the real storm, the HOA board meeting. I didn't expect much. I figured Karen would drag it out, fight tooth and nail to cling to her title. She wasn't the kind to give up power easily. But when Sunday morning came and the meeting was held in Alan's driveway, the turnout told me everything. Nearly every homeowner showed up. Folding chairs lined the grass, neighbors with notebooks and phones in hand, kids buzzing around the edges. The atmosphere wasn't tense this time, it was determined. Alan called the meeting to order. His voice carried clearly, steady and measured. We are here today to discuss the future of our HOA leadership following yesterday's events. Karen sat at the front, pale and stiff, her yellow citation slip folded tightly in her hand. She looked less like the queen of the neighborhood and more like someone on trial. Alan continued, "We've all witnessed the city inspector's findings. Multiple violations at Karen's residence. Unsafe conditions. And we've all heard her accusations, threats, and behavior toward neighbors." The murmurs rose in agreement. Mrs. Diaz stood, her voice firm. "I move to remove Karen Collins as president of the HOA, effective immediately." Applause broke out before Alan even asked for a second. Tom raised his hand. "I second." Alan nodded. "All in favor?" Hands shot up, dozens of them. Phones recorded every angle. Alan turned slowly. "Opposed?" Not a single hand. Karen shot to her feet, face flushed. "You can't. I built this HOA. Without me you'd all be living in squalor. You're nothing without my rules." But her voice cracked and the power was gone. The neighbors she once cowed with fines and threats stood firm. Alan spoke clearly. "Karen, by unanimous vote, you are removed as president. Effective immediately." The cheers that erupted shook the cul-de-sac. People clapped, whistled, some even hugged. For the first time in years, it felt like the neighborhood could breathe. Karen's face twisted, tears welling, but she said nothing more. She grabbed her bag, shoved her chair aside and stormed back into her house. The broken railing wobbled as she slammed the door shut behind her. Alan turned back to the group, his voice softer now. "From here forward we run this HOA together. Fairly. No more petty fines. No more bullying. Just community." The crowd applauded again, this time not out of mockery but out of hope. When the meeting ended, neighbors lingered, chatting like friends instead of rivals. People came up to me one after another. "You stood your ground. Thanks for not backing down. Glad you built that shed, James, it exposed everything." I nodded, humbled. All I'd wanted was a place to store my tools. I hadn't expected it to turn into a showdown that reshaped the entire HOA. Later that afternoon, the first inspector returned to finish his paperwork. He shook my hand, firm and genuine. "Mr. Miller, your shed is in perfect condition. I'll be closing the report as compliant." Relief washed over me. "Thank you." Appreciate it. He gave me a rare smile. You know, I inspect a lot of homes. But it's not often a shed turns into the center of a neighborhood revolution. We both laughed, and when he drove off, I looked around my backyard with fresh eyes. The shed stood there solid and steady, not just a storage space anymore but a symbol. A reminder that sometimes the smallest things, like building a shed, could topple the biggest bullies. As the sun dipped low, neighbors gathered again, this time for a cookout. Tom fired up his grill, Mrs. Diaz brought her famous empanadas, and even families who'd stayed quiet during Karen's reign joined in. Kids ran through sprinklers, dogs barked happily, and for the first time the cul-de-sac felt like a neighborhood again, not a dictatorship. From my porch, I caught sight of Karen's darkened windows. Curtains drawn tight, no movement. She was still there, stewing in silence. But she wasn't HOA president anymore. She was just another homeowner with violations to fix. And that was enough justice for now. Sometimes the loudest voice in the neighborhood isn't the strongest. It's just the one everyone's been too afraid to challenge. Karen built her power on fear, but fear collapses the moment truth shines on it. All it took was one shed, one inspection, and one moment of standing firm. So here's the lesson. No matter how small you feel, don't let yourself be bullied by someone who abuses their authority. The truth will always catch up. What about you? Have you ever had a neighbor or HOA president who tried to control everything? What would you have done if Karen had come after your shed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And if you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real HOA dramas just like this. Because sometimes the quietest cul-de-sacs hide the loudest battles.